and welcome to Meet the Author, a program that is brought to you by Quincy Access Television and the Thomas Crane Public Library. During this show, we will highlight authors and their work. Copies of their books are available for checkout at the Thomas Crane Public Library. Also, the library hosts book clubs for all ages, and you can find out more information about them if you visit the library's website, thomascranelibrary.org.
Hello, today I'm sitting with Ted Reinstein to talk about his new book, New England's General Stores. Ted, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So how has it been writing this book? I know you paired up with your wife.
I collaborated with my wife,
Awesome.
and we're
Nice.
still married.
Yeah, very good. It's not always easy to work together with family. Awesome. So you've been a reporter for many years,
Yes.
and this is your third book now.
My third book.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So what kind of led you into authoring?
You know, long story short, I've been doing a reporter for Chronicle, the nation's longest running locally produced nightly news magazine, for almost 24 years now. Yeah. So, and one of the things that's always frustrated me, although I love reporting all around New England, as I have for 24 years, but one of the things that's always frustrated me is that you come back, and for TV, it's always about condensing. It's always about cutting down. It's always about making things shrink. And, you know, over the years, there are so many stories I did. I realized that about 10 years ago that I would have loved to have had more time to let them breathe, to let people tell their stories, you know, longer, fuller. And so I realized that TV has its strengths, but that's not one of them, is letting people have time to tell a story. We in Chronicle still have, compared to a news piece, 3-4 times as long, you know, but they're still short.
Right.
So it occurred to me that print is really the only way to kind of have more time to go into depth, to go into more detail. And so that's where the idea for writing books came from, is that and my first books were all about, you know, stories that I had done for Chronicle, but now I had all this extra time to tell the story. So that's where the idea comes from.
Absolutely. And I see that a lot of what you write about is very New England based.
Very New England based.
Yes.
I actually am working on a new book project now, a fourth book that is not New England based. But yes, these first 3 books, I always refer to them kind of lightly as my New England series, my New England trilogy of 3 books about New England. Very much New England based. The first book, New England Notebook, is all about my favorite people and places, kind of from all over New England. Kind of a crazy catalog of my favorite New England stories. And my second book is all about New England's most famous feuds, Wicked Pissed.
Yeah.
And the third book, New England's General Stores, of course, is all about this iconic New England institution, you know, General Stores.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with New England General Stores, I know you compare the diners to the general stores and kind of their transition
Very
from that
much.
Americana nostalgia. Can you tell me a little bit about how the two compare? And
Absolutely, absolutely. So the diner and the general store, and by the way, there are other institutions that have a lot in common as well. And one of them is the public library. And they are what we call a third place. The general store, diner, public, you know, the public libraries, the neighborhood bar, they are what's called a third place in American life. These third places in American life, they're community gathering places. That's what makes them distinct. They're all places that you go to do a different thing, right? You go in to return a book, or you get a beer, or you sit down for breakfast, or you go into the general store to buy something. But what makes them all related is that they are places where people gather from one's community. So you expect, even though you're going in to do a certain thing, right? You're going in to return a book or get a stick of butter. You sort of expect you will interact with people from your community. And over the last 55 years, these places have disappeared a lot. Thank God they're not all gone. Right. But the diner, the general store, God forbid, public libraries, all of them have competed more and more for people's loyalty, for people to be relevant, you know, in day-to-day American life in the 21st century. So I feel very attached to them. Not just me, a lot of people, right? We all do. We all love to go into small independent bookstores, the public library, to meet a friend for a coffee or breakfast at the diner, at the general store. But they are threatened. They're threatened. And so that's what general stores have in common with diners and other places like that. They're third places, they're community gathering places. They're vital to American life, even if we don't think of them always that way. And they have been threatened like never before. So in some ways, the book is also kind of a call to pay attention to these wonderful community gathering places, because if we don't support them, they vanish.
Absolutely. And so what do you feel has given some of these stores the longevity that they have?
Great question. Each of the general stores, I profile about over 40 in my book, but each of them has something completely unique and distinct about, each one of them. But what accounts for the longevity of those that have survived, and many don't. General stores still close to the tune of about 20 to 25 every year in New England, but those that have survived, I think what accounts for the longevity, pure and simple, is the support of their community, like we've
Right.
just been saying.
Yeah.
These are stores that have figured out a way, just like good public libraries today, they have figured out a way to attract people. They've figured out a way to also appeal to younger people today. They all have, Wi-Fi. They all promote that. They all promote that it's a great little place to come in and sit and work on your laptop if you have to. And by the way, get a great lunch, get a hot breakfast, get great coffee. That's stuff that obviously did not exist in general stores, 40, 50 years ago. But that's why the ones that are surviving, that's why they survive.
That's so interesting. I do feel, I lived in Western Mass for many years, and so we had a few general stores out
Sure.
that way, a couple of diners, and it's true, it really does bring everybody in kind of together. People get to know you by name, and
Absolutely.
that sense of community sometimes gets lost.
Absolutely. I always say the diners and general stores are like the great small D, the most democratic, places. Not politically, but
Right.
they are open to everybody. They attract everybody. You sit down at a stool at a good diner, you might be sitting next to a CEO, you might be sitting next to a snowplow driver. Doesn't matter. Who cares? It's like everybody is there because it's a great, open, equal, welcoming community gathering place. Same is true at a general store.
Absolutely. So in your book, you profile a few stores. I know that there's some differences. You cite some that needed to be reclaimed and some that have had longevity straight through the years. Of those, which would you say are your favorites, if you have any?
I had never anticipated that question, but now I do, because I'm asked it all the time. And I always tell people about my favorite general store. It's in Vermont, and it is my favorite because it's the ultimate underdog as general store. And those are my favorite stories that I've done as a reporter over the years, whether the underdog is a person who's had to overcome difficult personal challenges and go on, whether it's a town, an old mill town or an old harbor town that has had to reinvent itself, because the prosperity has left. But this is the general store as ultimate underdog. It's a general store in a small town in Vermont that has had to pick itself up and keep going, even though it's been lost twice.
Oh, wow.
So it's the ultimate underdog. And the story behind it is fascinating. And it's kind of fascinating that a community would stick with its general store, as I say, even though at one point physically it was gone.
Yeah.
And they have refused to let go of it. So it's a great statement about both general stores and the human spirit.
Absolutely. It sounds like that might need to be a book on itself.
It could be. It could
The
be.
story of that store. Awesome.
It could be. Or a great movie.
Absolutely.
Because I know you're interested in filmmaking.
I
So
am.
there you go. It's a great idea for a movie.
Awesome.
I always tell the story of general stores in my book talk by way of the story of not just the specific ones I'm talking about, but the whole sweep of general stores in New England. Why they were really central to New England's development and therefore America's development commercially, and then why they began to be threatened and why they began to disappear and were almost gone. And then why certain small towns in New England that refused to let go of the general store really offered a roadmap for how to save the general store. And then I share some of my favorite quirky, even in some ways hilarious stories that have to do with certain general stores. And I end with my favorite general store. and why that kind of, in some ways, symbolizes, why general stores matter so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
It's absolutely my pleasure. You can probably tell I love talking about general stores.
Absolutely. I mean, they really are fascinating. And I'm
They
sure
tell a lot more about New England than just general stores. That's what's great.
Absolutely. And I think each one of us probably has one in mind when we're talking about
And I
them.
love asking that question.
hometown.
Love asking that question because everybody does.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm joined today by Carter Allen, who's going to talk to us about the Decibel Diaries, a journey through rock and roll in 50 concerts. Carter, thanks so much for joining me.
Nice to be here, Clay.
Yeah. Do you keep a journal? How do you know? I mean, 50 shows, I'm sure you've seen a lot more than 50 shows.
Yeah, I actually have
Even
seen
this year, you've probably seen more than 50 shows.
almost 3,400.
Yeah. So
Actually.
how'd you pick 50?
Well, when my publisher asked if I would do, we figured out that we would do this sort of book. And the reason for that was I've kept track. I mean, I'm like a lot of people. I saved my ticket stubs when I was a kid. And so after a time, I organized my ticket stubs, and I started writing the shows in a notebook and putting the stubs in there, ticket stubs. And so after a while, I started keeping a list. And I think that was based on when I was in school, I used to keep a reader's list of the books I read for school.
Yeah.
And I found it really interesting because I could refer back. After about 10, 15 years, when your memory starts going a little softer around the edges, even when you're younger, because of all the experiences you're going through, it's useful to be able to see that, oh yeah, I went with Joe to see, the James Gang back in such and such a month in such and such a place. Yeah. And over time, I put it in a database so I could search it, so I could find out, okay, how many U2 shows have I been to?
Right.
And every once in a while, my wife would say, how many shows have I seen with you? And I can search that. So it's almost like a hobby. So actually, there's a lot of information. And when you look in the database at a concert, the memories can come back.
Sure.
Just actually knowing the time and place, and I can remember things. So I picked 50 of the best shows.
Nice. Do you couple that with things like the live music archives? So you can actually go back and listen to them too? Do you ever go back and listen to the shows?
Yeah. There's, in fact, there's a chapter in the book about seeing Lynyrd Skynyrd at the Orpheum Theater. And it was significant just because of what happened afterwards with their plane crash. It was only a year later, less than a year. They would only play Boston area one more time, and that would be it with the original band. And I remembered flashes of memory from the show, but I'm like, God, I don't remember what they played. So you can go to setlist.com, and now you got to cross-check that because
It's imperfect. Yeah.
it's imperfect. But I found the entire concert on the web, and he says "Hello Boston," and so I listened to it, and it sparked all kinds of memories.
Yeah.
It's tremendous, And in fact, there was another show I wrote about Aerosmith at the Centrum back in 1982. It was actually a terrible show. I wrote about it because it really served to set up Aerosmith's amazing resurgence and comeback, which is one of the greatest in rock history.
But it was the bottom before they came back?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that show, I found parts of it on video.
Wow.
Someone had snuck in an old camera, and it's terrible, grainy footage and everything, but you can confirm some of your memories, because I think that it's more likely that your memories are correct, but sometimes you can transpose them onto a different event.
That makes sense.
So you're remembering I'm like, yeah, I remember he fell off the stage, but it's a different show. It might even be a different band if if you had too much to drink that night. I don't know.
Maybe it was a four combo, or, it was a four top, or maybe there were 8 of them up on the stage.
Right. So it's any chance that I could, even going to Wikipedia. I like going to Wikipedia, reading what they have to say, and then going to the sources at the end of the article, and chasing down those sources
and seeing if they knew what they were talking about.
Yeah. And if you reference a really decent source like the Boston Globe or Encyclopedia Britannica or something that's reputable where they actually do fact check, you can be reasonably certain that you're on the right path. Yeah.
So I know you were just telling me before we came on camera about the show that you saw last night, Fleetwood Mac. They have quite a history here. There was just an album that I discovered. I think they just released some of the original Boston tapes from Fleetwood Mac back before
Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks.
Yeah, exactly. Even before Steve, before
Yeah.
either of them joined the band.
You're talking about them. They booked 3 nights at the Boston Tea Party in 1970.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and they had recorded those shows ostensibly to release a live album,
Okay.
which, for one reason or another, they never got to. And probably the reason was they had their founder and guiding light, Peter Green, did too much LSD and lost it. And
Yeah.
kind of he's still alive, and he's still wandering in and out of, an altered state. But he quickly lost his interest in playing guitar for a long time.
Yeah.
And so that original vision fell apart, and the next guitar player, Jeremy Spencer, he wandered off and joined a religious cult and was in that cult for 30 years.
Wow.
And then their third guitarist, Danny Kerwin, who was also brilliant, became a drunk and a homeless guy. I mean, it's almost like there was,
There's some conspiring almost.
yeah, the
Like, it's
fate
amazing
was
it happened.
definitely conspiring. I mean, that Fleetwood Mac is a test case, an interesting story of just the fates going crazy on those guys. I mean, look at what happened afterwards. They became the biggest band in the world, and they had all this drama behind them. I mean, all the baggage and the broken relationships and the drug abuse, and then the fact that they're alive is amazing, and still being creative. I mean, it's an interesting story.
Did you see any of those Tea Party shows?
No, that was a little. I moved to
That was a little
Boston in
before you.
'76.
Okay.
So I was up in New Hampshire. I was going to college.
Oh.
But we used to come down to Boston.
Oh.
But I did see Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks' first show in Boston.
Okay.
And I wrote about that in Decibel Diaries. It was
Okay.
in 1975.
Yep.
And they were warming up for Jefferson Starship. They weren't even headlining.
Oh.
And Fleetwood Mac was a good FM staple band, so you could always count on them playing the Orpheum or the Music Hall.
This is
Listen-
before Rumors? What was
It
that?
is. Yeah, this was when the Fleetwood Mac album, which was just prior to Rumors, came out.
Okay.
That's where Lindsey and Stevie had
When
their
they joined.
debut.
Yeah.
And they had hits on that album. That's where Rhiannon was from. And
Yeah.
but it was like there's a warm-up band. People are wandering into their seats,
Right.
and no one's paying. Some people are really into it. A lot of people aren't paying attention. And Stevie Nicks does Rhiannon for the first time. She introduces a song. This is a song about a Welsh witch. No one pays much attention, and she starts singing, and she just loses herself in this performance where she's just shredding her voice, and Lindsey Buckingham is screaming, and these are the new people that you don't really know much about. And it was like the electricity was palpable. People that hadn't even been paying attention
Just
at
had
all
to lock in,
suddenly
yeah.
like something amazing is happening on stage, and everybody was just locked into it. And when she got at that time, that song would go 7 or 8 minutes. When it was over, people were just like, "Oh my God!" and you could tell that it was one of them "A Star Is Born" moments. And then Lindsey Buckingham, since Fleetwood Mac was always a guitar band, he was a new guitar player, and he starts playing these amazing solos, and people realized there was something really happening here.
Yeah. And there was something happening before. I mean, like you said, Peter Green was amazing too.
Right,
It's,
right.
What a
But this
run.
was a gateway to they were on the ropes. That band
Yeah.
was about to go away.
Yeah.
And Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks were starving in LA. They were about to give up music, and who knows what would happen with them. And there was this amazing marriage that happened, which is one of the true amazing moments in rock and roll.
Yeah.
And so I feel privileged to have been there that night to see that first night in Boston. So I had to write about that in the book.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
that's one of those, incredible moments that, which I really remember vividly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see? It's mostly rock shows. I mean, it's called Journey Through Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
What kind of rock is it? Mostly classic and kind of mainstream rock that you talk about, or?
Well, what has become classic? I mean,
Yeah.
there is a story of seeing Nirvana in there, and
Okay.
Is
Is it all here in Boston, or?
It's
in
not
Boston area?
all. The earlier stuff, some of it. I mean, I went to school for a year in Miami, so some of the shows are down there. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so the first couple are in Pennsylvania,
Sure.
and there's some in New Hampshire, and then Live Aid, so overseas,
Okay,
and
yeah.
Roger Waters at the Berlin Wall in
Oh
1990.
wow, that would have been a show.
So, and it was just with the history around it,
Taking
surrounding
down
it.
the wall with the wall. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like the Summer of Love in Berlin, and seeing the East Berliners coming over excuse me, because they could walk across at that point,
Yeah.
and they're just walking around. I mean, being transfixed by a neon sign. I've never seen it. And we went over to East Berlin, and it was like,
It was a pretty desolate place from everything I understand.
it was brown,
Yeah.
gray, black, and white.
Yeah.
And if you saw any color, I mean, it was scary. It wasn't. It was like 1984.
Yeah.
It was a visualization of Orwellian, prophecy.
Right.
And I was like, wow, this place, in 1961, it just stopped.
Yeah.
It never grew. And we felt like a time capsule was opening, and we were over in 1961.
Yeah.
I mean, something I didn't write about in that book was, I didn't have space for it, but when we wandered over to East Berlin, there was a butcher an enterprising capitalistic butcher from West Berlin who drove a truck over and got permission to park in a square and was, opened up like a food truck. And he's
Right.
like, he's, Wurst and, whatever. And people were just like staring at him like it was Roger Waters doing his show. They're staring at the butcher. Imagine them seeing the wall show with all the lights and everything. People were just like, there were soldiers dancing on tanks. And,
Yeah.
I feel really lucky to have been there. I was sent over there to report for a few radio stations.
Nice.
So I got lucky in that one. That was
Yeah.
nice.
That's very cool. Have you been back to Berlin since? 'Cause I've heard it's become just an amazing city. Everybody I've
Yeah.
talked to recently has just
Well,
been
the pro-
raving about it.
Yeah, I mean, the problem then was that they had two of everything. They had two town halls, two police stations,
Sure.
two of this, two that. That wall ran right down the middle.
Yeah.
And then, they had a lot of adjustment, and, a lot of people were resisting the change,
Yeah.
but they seem to have come through it okay.
You mentioned that you got sent over to cover for a few radio stations. I know you're a DJ for WZLX.
Yeah.
Who else have you DJ'd for?
Well, that was 90, so I was still working at WBCN then.
Okay.
And so BCN had been gobbled up by CBS Radio at that time. I mean, it was a gradual period of bigger fishes eating the smaller fishes.
Yeah.
So you're part of a chain of stations now. I mean, some of them were very legendary. I mean, MMR or HJY in Philadelphia, and so they sent me over to report for Philadelphia and New York, but I didn't work at those stations. They were just part of our company. So it was tricky, though, because you would, back then you still had to ring up an overseas operator.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know-
Reporting was very different. You couldn't just go on your phone and phone it in.
I mean, at least they had like a phone bank. I remember being on the phone and it was right next to the Berlin Wall.
Wow.
There's this trailer of phones, and we're in there. Everybody had their 20 minutes to file their reports or whatever.
Yeah.
And I would file to a central location, just bang out 5 different reports and say, reporting for what station, and then do the same report.
Right.
But sitting there and doing a report and sitting next to the Berlin Wall, it's just surreal.
Yeah.
It just was, and then to know that it was coming down, you could still chip off a piece for yourself.
Right.
It was.
That's a pretty awesome place to have been in time.
Yeah.
A place and time to have been.
And in the Live Aid, that was 5 years earlier. That was
With Bob Geldof. Yeah.
Geldof's Live Aid.
Yeah.
I was over in Ireland on holiday,
Okay.
and I knew the guys in U2, and they said, we're doing this show, Live Aid, which I knew about, but I went on vacation. They said, we're doing a show, and do you want to come over? We'll take care of you. We'll set you up with passes and a seat. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Twist my arm.
Yeah. They said, we'll put you in our hotel. You have to pay, but we'll put you in a hotel, which was a good thing because every hotel around was sold out for
Right.
that. It was much bigger than I imagined it would be. The hotel was very expensive. I was really freaked out when I showed up. It's like, This is the hotel. I think in the book I make a comment that they showed me to my room, which was a corner room, and I'm like, my God, and I looked at, there was a writing desk there, and I was like, the writing desk is probably older than America. Don't scratch it.
Right.
But Live Aid was wild, so I saw the London side of it,
Okay.
and whereas most of my friends saw the American side. I have no
Right.
memories of the American side, really, because when there wasn't a great band on stage, I was running off to file a report. which was really hard at Wembley Stadium because they had very few phones.
Right.
And you had to find an overseas operator, and and I actually paid a janitor to use his office,
Oh.
which I'm usually not so, I don't know, capitalistic. Well, it was a means to an end.
Yeah.
He ended up with some extra cash, and I got to use his phone.
You got your work done. You got to see the show.
That's right.
Yeah.
I had no
Excellent.
money to get back to London, but
Yeah. There's ways.
it worked out.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. If someone asks me, "What's your favorite new album?" I often have a hard time processing that.
Favorites are really tough.
Yeah.
I always find what am I listening to right now? I can find something that I really like about it, and I'd like to talk about that.
Right. But if people start mentioning bands, all these memories pop into my mind.
Yeah.
I remember specific situations with groups and interviews I've done. Have you ever met Keith Richards and Mick Jagger? And I'm like, yeah. And I got stories about that. But
And you
so
actually
it's-
got to meet them because you were covering it as a journalist. Is that most of your access to the musicians, or
Most-
how did you?
most of the access is because of radio.
Yeah.
I studied to be a writer and moved to Boston to try and get a job at the Boston Globe. That
Yeah.
was my motivation. But there were good people working at the Globe, and there was no opening. And the radio thing happened mainly because I knew about music, and WBCN was a music station, and
Yeah.
the DJs organized their own shows back then. You could play what you wanted.
Just wasn't Clear Channel. Yeah.
Right. It was a fun time to get into radio.
I bet.
I wasn't a great jock by any means. I had none of the smooth delivery or anything. I had done college radio, but they hired me because I knew about music.
Yeah.
So it was a fun time to get into radio. So yeah, it was a radio access. I was a music director at BCN for 11 years. So I set up a lot of interviews for like Mark Perrino and Charles and those guys. And so I would get to meet the bands.
I'm sure there's a ton of really good stories in the book then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I know we're not talking about this, but I did write a book about WBCN
Okay.
called Radio Free Boston. That came out back in 2013. And there's a lot of those stories about BCN and how that developed, and that was a fun book too.
It's a whole book in its own. Yeah.
Yeah, that took a long time to write because it was 3 years and a lot of interviews.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. It's awesome, and I'm really looking forward to reading more of the book and hearing more stories.
Be sure to check out our other episodes of this program to explore other authors and their works. For more information about library programs and services, visit the Thomas Crane Public Library's website, thomascranelibrary.org, or call them at 617-376-1316.